So this picture up here is what we call a splat point. And this is from Orange Theory Fitness, which is kind of an alternative to a gym. You can go as many days of the week as you want, and the days fluctuate, they change. Michelle just suckered me into this thing. Like when it comes to cardio stuff, I'm just out. I don't like it. And there's a lot of lunges. You know what a lunge is? Like I would do one for you, but I'm not built for lunges. I cannot do them, especially reverse lunge. There's no way. I'm just not coordinated enough. Lunges are awful. But anyway, I've been going with her for about 4 weeks. 2 weeks ago, I didn't feel really well, so I thought my numbers were down. Well, this past Friday, my numbers were up again. And the splat point is a really cool thing, and it helps gauge where you are. Well, 3 weeks ago, I got 36 splat points. And it just so happens that the particular place we are on the treadmill, there's a screen right here above to our left. And it shows everybody in the room. And the room's kind of small. There's treadmills, there's a few weights, and then there's a rowing machine. And there's multiples of those. And you alternate. You rotate depending on where you are in the dynamic. You rotate and you'll do some exercises at each station. So we're on a treadmill and I look up and I notice that I'm ahead of everybody in splat points. And I'm really competitive, like to a fault. Like if we split up in cars, the family, and we're on our way to a destination, I want to get there first. I'm very competitive. You know, if we're walking in the grocery store and I'm going to go down this aisle, I'm pushing the buggy this way and another buggy's coming, I'm going to go. If I know they're going, I'm going. I'm just competitive. I'm in competition with some of you all right now and you have no idea. I've been in competition with a handful of you for about 2 years now. You just don't even know. I'm just so competitive. So I'm like killing it. And I walk away with 36 splat points. And the next closest was 21. So I'm on this crazy high. I'm talking about it. I can't believe Michelle didn't knock me off of that pedestal really quick, but she just let it linger. So this past Friday, I noticed that I'm in 5th place when it comes to splat points. Like there's 4 people ahead of me, and I'm thinking, okay, this one girl, her name's Sadie. Okay, right? Yeah. So Sadie is like way ahead of everybody. And I'm like, I'm coming after Sadie. You know, I'm coming after her. So I'm on these treadmills, and I beat this one guy, get past his splat points, beat 2 other guys, get past them in second. And then when I'm looking at the time, there's just no way. She's got like 30 and I'm at 26 and we've got about a minute left. There's just no way I'm going to earn 4 splat points. I'm not even going to be able to tie this individual. So when it all shakes down, we look at our numbers. I end up with 27 and she has 30. And I'm thinking, oh, and I was looking at Michelle because she's on the treadmill beside of me. I'm like, hey, coming after, Sadie. And she was like, yeah, go, baby. But she said it with a little hint. There was a nuance in her tone that I knew something was off. And she was like, epic comeback. Yeah, it's going to be great. So I guess I compartmentalized that. So long story short, we're home. It's Friday evening. We're sitting around the table and my mind's just working. And I start to realize, wait, am I even tracking this right? I got 36 splat points, and then I walked away with 27, and I'm far ahead of these numbers. But I'm like, when I look around the room at Orange Theory, there's a lot of fit people, and I've only been going 4 or 5 weeks. Like, how am I putting up these numbers? And she said, well, yeah, you should do a little research on the splat points. I'm like, okay, well, just tell me what's going on. She was like, well, you don't want to get a high number because if you get a high number really quick, then it shows that you're really out of shape because your body doesn't have to work so hard to get them. So as you get healthier, those numbers are going to go down. So I'm like, I'm working hard for nothing? And she said, well, it's even worse. You're not even in competition with Sadie. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it was like, boom, reality check. I'm in competition with myself. So my question for you is, if you find yourself in competition with just yourself, how do you make decisions? When you're alone and you're processing, when you're thinking about your relation to other people, when you think about moving forward or your future, how do you make decisions? Is it based on the way you feel? Or based on something you really want? Or is there this personally formed framework of logic that you have and that you use? Well, thankfully, we're in this series, Above All Else, and it comes from Proverbs 4:23, which simply states, above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. And thankfully, this story is wrapped up, or that verse is wrapped up in the story of David. And you know, for the past 3 weeks, we've been walking through 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. And you probably have a study Bible that will tell you chapters 10, 11, and 12 are like this coherent text. And it's true, but we've just been focusing on chapters 11 and 12 because they identify and they outline what the ancient Hebrews considered heart. And I told you before, outside of the redemptive work of Christ and the writings about that and like the Gospels and some of the letters, these are two of the most powerful chapters in the entire Bible and two of my most favorite because they walk through the story of David, which in essence is your story and my story. It's so easily to step into this context and see, oh, this is how David did not guard his heart. This is what happened, and this is why I need to guard mine and how. So last week in this series, so we'll be in chapter 12, and the scene is David finds himself in competition with himself. You'll remember he had this affair with a lady named Bathsheba. She becomes pregnant, and then David goes on this emotional tirade of trying to make things right and cover this up, and eventually has Bathsheba's husband murdered. Well, God sends Nathan the prophet to rebuke David. And David realizes in a moment of clarity that he has sinned, and he says, I've sinned against the Lord. What's next? So just listen to the story. It's not on the screen. I just want you to hear the story. So Nathan replied, well, the Lord has taken away your sin. And you're not going to die, David. But, and I'll tell you, we can have a conversation, especially in our sensitive world, not sensitive in a bad way, but very sensitive to topics and details. We can have a conversation about some of the nuances of this passage. Please reach out to me because there's some quote unquote troubling details here that we don't want to ignore. It's just not our time to talk about them right now based on this series. But if this passage troubles you in any way from the perspective of what David does, from the perspective of Bathsheba, from the perspective of Bathsheba being a mother and what she is about to experience, please reach out to me so that we can have a better conversation about those characteristics of this context. But the story goes on. The Lord has taken away your sin, David. You are not going to die. But because in doing this, you have made the enemies of the Lord show contempt for the Lord, then the son will die. Well, after Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became ill. So what does David do? David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted. He went into his house, and he spent the nights lying on the ground. Now, I don't know if your study Bible will tell you this or not, but there could be a neat parallel here. Multiple times when David was trying to trick Uriah and trying to cover up his own mistakes. Multiple times, Uriah was brought to the palace. And instead of going home and lying with Bathsheba, he spent the nights on the ground. I don't know if you've ever been in one of those circumstances to where the mistake or the mess up that you've created, you find yourself like walking around in that. And sometimes intentionally, like trying to get your bearings straight in one of those moments. This could be the setup. So he spent the nights lying on the ground. So the elders or the servants of his household, they stood beside him and they tried to get him up from the ground, but he refused. And he would not even eat with them. Well, on the seventh day, the child died. And David's servants, they were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, wow, the child was still living. I mean, we spoke to David, but he wouldn't listen. How in the world do we tell him that the child is dead? He'll probably do something desperate. Well, David noticed that his servants were whispering among themselves, and he realized what they were whispering about, that the child was dead. So he asked, is the child dead? Yes, he's dead. Then That's verse 20 of chapter 12. Then. You know, every single one of us in a given moment, and maybe multiple times throughout your life, maybe multiple times in a month based on the context of what's happening, maybe multiple times in a week, every single one of us will experience an I am here moment where you find yourself face to face with reality and you realize that the only competition is right here. You're going to be in competition with yourself. And how do you navigate? How do you move forward? And when you start doing some mental mapping with this I am here moment, you'll realize that there's multiple options. I mean, there are many paths forward. And the most successful decisions will arrive or they will develop once you're able to identify or see where these paths lead. You can see that there's multiple paths, and you can identify or see clearly where they lead. And some of you are very wise with that. You know that you have multiple options for a decision you need to make, but you can already see where this goes. And I already know where this goes. Oh, well, I've been there before. No, I made that mistake too many times. You can identify that. Well, the tricky part is that with all those multiple options, those paths, there's only 3 possibilities. One is that we'll put our feet on a path that simply develops into no change. Like this option nurtures the status quo. You're going nowhere. Things are and they will stay as is. Then the second possibility is that there is change, but it's negative. So David finds himself in chapter 11 in an I am here moment. And that develops into an affair, adultery. It develops into lying and hypocrisy. It develops into murder. It's just sending you in reverse. And then the other possibility is that there is actually the potential for positive change. There was a guy named Richard Tereshadin. I think I got his name right, his last name. So I'm just going to reiterate. Richard was his name, okay? So he did this study, and he's actually proved, and I'm hesitant to use this word, but I will. He scientifically proved or demonstrated that the cliche that you and I often use, what doesn't kill us only makes us stronger. He's demonstrated that that is true. It's proven. It exists that what doesn't kill you can really have the potential to only make you stronger. I mean, we see this in some cultural ways, like Walt Disney. I mean, how noted is Walt Disney? But he was once fired for lack of creativity. What about the Beatles? The Beatles are arguably the most iconic band in our history. But they were let go from a producer because he said, boy bands like you are on their way out. Michael Jordan, you know the story, was cut from his varsity team. He failed to make the team. Michael Jordan, need we say more? And it's even better news for you and I, because you and I, similar to David, you and I serve a God who's in the business of whatever happens to us, using that to make us stronger and help us to identify the best path forward, where we should put our feet when we find ourselves in an I am here moment. That's why the text goes on in 2 Samuel. It says, then David got up from the ground. I am here. When he realizes the child is dead, not until then, more about that in just a moment, but not until then does he get up off of the ground and he starts moving forward down a path. I mean, you and I serve the same God that David serves. That's why we can take heart in this, because Romans 8:28, and if you've been around church for a while, this is probably highlighted, underlined, some kind of decor in your office or in your home or your kitchen, somewhere this is underscored in your life, that the God you and I serve, this God, in all things, he works. Even the experiences that you and I have that we would categorize as mistakes, a mess up, an extremely poor decision, a bad choice, just a train wreck in my life, a very complicated season, just bad behavior, sin. God works in all of those things to bring about good to those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. That's the same God that David serves. So David gets up off the ground, and listen to this. This is on the screen, just listen. He does everything now that his servants were trying to get him to do. So he gets up from the ground. He washes, and might be a little weird language for you and I, but he washes, puts on lotions, and changes his clothes, and then goes into the house of the Lord and worships. So it might be a little bit of weird language for us, but in ancient Hebrew culture, this was David intentionally moving out of a state of mourning, not M-O-R-N, M-O-U-R-N, intentionally moving out of a state of mourning. And then at his own request in his own house, they served him food and he ate. You can see David identifying those paths available for him and saying, no, I've been there. I can't do that. Something's got to change. So if I really handle the truth well, this is the best foot forward. Now, when this happens, let me just take a pause here. When you try to take truth and handle it the best that you possibly can, when you start defining reality, when you realize that you are only in competition with yourself, and you have that I am here moment, and you start to take steps forward to be as healthy as you can be, to be as real and open and honest as you possibly can be, then the people around you who don't know how to handle truth, the people around you who are not taking the steps to become healthy like you are, they will not understand what's going on. And not only will they not understand it, it will increase the likelihood that there's going to be criticism or conflict, not just from watching people, but even from people who are extremely close to you. So this causes crazy confusion with the servants. So the servants, actually, the text tells us, I think it's verse 18 or 19, the text tells us that the servants, they were afraid to tell David that the child's dead. Now, I get it. That could be complicated. I mean, how do you actually do this? About 20 years ago, I got a phone call. There was a family who had moved from China. They were American, but they had moved from China and they were back in Harlan. I mean, how do you move from China to Harlan? I don't know. Okay, but they landed in Harlan. So they're in Harlan and they actually start visiting the church where I was pastoring at the time, just home church, beautiful people. And there was just one person absent, and it was the father. So there was a mother and two children, but the children were adults at this time. So the father calls me. They'd been here about 6 months, and the father calls me and says, hey, I need you to do something. You know, I am nowhere close to where you are, and I actually don't know where my daughter is. But if you're connected, because I think she goes to your church, if you know where she is, I need you to give her a message. I need you to go and find her and tell her that her mom has just been killed in a car accident. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. So walking through the logistics of sharing that information with someone is complicated. It's tricky. It's emotional. So the fact that they're afraid, I get it. But what this text also tells me is that they don't know how to handle the truth. They're afraid of the truth. They're afraid of reality. That's why they're confused when the child's alive and David is just stretched out on the ground, crying his eyes out. But the child dies, and now David gets up and does everything they've been begging him to do. This confuses them. They don't know how to handle the truth. Now listen, I want you to know this, and you've been human long enough. You know this. You know this as well as I do. This is just a reminder that if these realities come your way, that doesn't necessarily mean the ball's in your court and you're the problem or you're the issue. Actually, the issue may be that you are taking steps to become healthy, to get your life in order because you know you're only in competition with yourself and you're trying to straighten some stuff out. So you're becoming painfully and practically honest with yourself. And the people around you, they just don't get it. So the servants, they were afraid to tell David. And being afraid, here's how the text delineates the details of the servants. So they started whispering among themselves. When people don't know how to talk to you, they will talk about you. Be on your guard with that if you're trying to become healthy. If people don't know how to talk to you, they will talk about you. Madison Hills, I've been a pastor for a long time. And I want you to know that this whispering dynamic, whispering among themselves, is noticeably absent here. And I am so proud, as your pastor, I'm so proud of you for that. You're a group that, if you don't know how already, but it looks like you do, you're at least learning how to handle the truth. Super proud of you for that. The text also goes on, and they actually finally approach David, and they say, "Why are you acting like this? Everybody knows that if your child dies, you don't take a bath, you don't put on new clothes, you don't go to church, you don't go out to dinner, you mourn. Why are you acting like this? I mean, when the child was alive, you were just distraught. Now the child's dead and you're okay?" So the people that don't know how to handle the truth, when you do, when you start defining reality, when you get better at competing, not with the people around you, but yourself, when you find yourself becoming more healthy, and not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, when you're guarding your heart, the people around you who aren't, they're not going to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Watch out for that. It's in those moments right there that you probably need to increase the capacity and the consistency to guard your heart. Good? Okay, so moving on in the story, David actually answers the question. And he gives a profoundly important answer, in my opinion. This is an answer that will be extremely practical for every single one of us in any given situation. What David does next and how he responds is probably my favorite couple of verses in the entire Bible. This is a moment where David defines reality, and he does it in an "I am here" moment. He realizes the competition is here, not with anyone else. And the way he defines reality gives you and I something extremely tangible to take away with us this morning. So David answers and he said, "Well, while the child was alive, my thoughts were simply, who knows? I mean, it's a gamble. It's 50-50. The child might survive, the child might, who knows what's going to happen? So I fasted and I wept and I thought, maybe the Lord will be gracious and let the child live." I don't know about you, but when I read this passage, there's one nuance that David overlooks. And I want to call it out so that you and I don't overlook this nuance in our lives, especially when it's related to our relationship with our God and our prayer life, if you will. So the nuance is David had the word of the Lord presented to him. David had the word of the Lord presented to him, and the word of the Lord was simply this: the child is going to die. That's the reality. David finds himself in a spot to where he says, maybe not. This is why, we don't have it on the screen, but this is why I need to take note of this. This is why James would come along later on in church history and say, hey, if you're lacking wisdom, ask God, who gives generously with all, without finding any kind of fault, and he will give you wisdom. But if you doubt, you will receive nothing, because you'll be blown here and there. And I see that sometimes in the walk with Christ followers. The word of the Lord is presented to us, and it's clear. And we can latch onto it, and we can take it, and we can actually implement that into our lives. But there's some kind of who knows dynamic that starts to work its way into our thinking and starts to chip away at how you and I are guarding our hearts. And then we're blown here and there by, well, so-and-so was whispering. Well, so-and-so thinks. Or had this moment that it just kind of occurred, and then we start getting confused and we complicate the scenario. David had the word of the Lord presented to him clearly. So why does he find himself in a who knows moment? Well, that's what kept him going in that negative change or no change. But anyway, he gets his bearings straight and he says, who knows? And I love how this plays out. He said, I wept while the child was alive. I wept. I fasted. I thought. What does that sound like? The past 3 weeks. Remember, ancient Hebrews would define the heart not just as this blood-pumping organ. For the ancient Hebrews, like David, the heart was the person. It was the core. And the heart made up the feelings and the desires and the intellect. And all of that culminated in how one makes decisions. So in this moment, David has this realization where he begins to define reality. He has this realization where he's able to handle the truth in an extremely positive way. So he says, I thought, who knows? Maybe the Lord. But now that the child is dead, and notice this, why should I fast? Now that statement doesn't have anything to do with the theology of fasting. You know, you would fast to get answers or closure. You would fast in a ritualistic way to honor and worship your God. You would fast to get a connection with your Creator. You would fast for multiple reasons. So it's not a knock on the theology of fasting. What David is doing here is saying, in this state, it made sense for me because I was thinking, who knows what's going to happen? But now that the child is dead, why should I fast? It makes no sense for me to fast now that the child is dead. He's defining reality. So he starts making decisions based on the truth. So in this scenario, this story, what we find is David demonstrating not a way of making decisions that's kind of detached from our lives. He's showing us how to make decisions based on an integration of our feelings and our desires and our intellect. You bring all of that together and you realize, what is reality and how do I handle this truth? And that's how I will make my decisions. So he goes on, I think it's very tangible for you and I. It says, while the child was alive, thought this, but now that he's dead, why should I fast? I can't bring him back, but I will go to him. I love that parallel. There are some things that you can and can't do. And one of the best ways to decide on how to make any given decision is simply this. You ask yourself and then you answer, what can I do? And what can't I do? And sometimes that's very physical. There's physical limitations to what you can't and can do. And sometimes it's related to just how you think about a particular offer or opportunity, what you can and can't do. Sometimes what you want or how you're feeling, what you can and can't do. A very elementary example of this is on my calendar. I have a couple of blocks of times, and on those times, there's simply the word can't. That's it. So when someone calls, texts, asks, I simply say, oh, at that time, I can't, because I know the reality of my life. I know the reality of the rhythm of my life. I know the reality of the rhythm of the responsibilities of my life. And if those blocks get messed with, then a lot of other things, dominoes, start to fall. And if I'm not careful, it'll just fall out of order. So it simply can't. So I say, oh, at that time, I can't. So what about you? In a decision that's upcoming that you have to make, what can you do and what can't you do? Maybe some of you get painfully practical with this, and you've got a great opportunity, but you just can't be dishonest. Good for you. You've got a great opportunity to make things right with someone, but you just can't deny the truth of what's happening. So what about you when you're making decisions? Is there this integration of your feelings, your desires, your intellect that helps you shape and make those decisions? If not, let me leave you with one more verse as we close up this series. This comes from our Lord and our leader, Jesus. Now, when Jesus was walking around in the first century and the word truth was dropped, it was the exact same word. So if you and I read truth in the New Testament, the languages that Jesus spoke, the exact same word that we translate truth is the same word for reality. Again, if you've been around church for a while, this is probably one of those passages that you've heard or taught, or maybe you have it underlined or highlighted in your Bible. And it's John 8, where Jesus says, if you hold to my teachings, then you will know the truth. And it's this truth that will actually set you free. You and I could literally, accurately read that. If you hold to my teachings, then you'll know reality. And the reality, it will set you free. So David goes on, and the text tells us, again, it's not on screen. So then, without another word to the servants, David, and might be one of those other tricky details that you want to talk more about. David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her, and he lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. And Solomon grows up and writes the words, above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. He was fully aware of the story of his father. That's an amazing wrap up for that. So, you need help making decisions? You need help guarding your heart? Well, that's why we're here. That's why you belong here. That's why you're part of this. That's why you make up Madison Hills. Please see me or one of our leaders, and we can help you take those steps forward. Sound good? Good on the same page? Are all hearts clear? All right, Father, thank you so much for loving us the way you do. Thank you for exposing us to the raw truth of your word, for showing us how to identify the paths available to us, and then to see clearly where they lead, whether it's change, no change, or positive change. And then giving us the wisdom and the courage to take the steps forward we need to take on the right path, all because we're learning how to handle the truth. We're defining reality. And in doing so, we're being set free. God, you're so good. And for the goodness available to us from you that we can find nowhere else, we're thankful for that. And as always, we thank you and we praise you and we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.